What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Pro Football Focus Show here on RotoGrinders, Week 3 edition. I am your loyal host over the years, Brit Devine, here with Daniel Kelley. Daniel, fun Week 2, better than Week 1 for me, and I'm looking to carry some momentum into Week 3. And this week, with all the injuries, is shaping up to what's going to be a very, very fun DFS week, I think, for everybody.
It's going to be fascinating. We're going to have all sorts of names that nobody's talked about in months or years or ever, and we're going to have to be figuring out which one of those to dive in on.
Yeah, game of the century too, right? Ravens, Chiefs, a whole lot of fun stuff going in DFS. But one of the things we're going to do on this show first is we're going to look a little bit back at what happened in Week 2 and see if there's anything we can take out of maybe even some Week 1 stuff as well here. You look at this at your article on PFF every week, and you wanted to lead this off by talking about the Buccaneers, maybe not in the way everybody's thinking about on the offensive side. You're a little more hitting on them from the defensive angle. So let's see what we learned in Week 2 about them.
Yeah, so the Buccaneers so far have played San Francisco, who they don't have one big running back, but that has a good backfield, and they've played Carolina. So that is Christian McCaffrey. And that's two good run teams that they have allowed on 53 total touches. That's receptions and carries, 184 yards and no touchdowns. That's not much. Those same two backfields in their other games have 71 touches, 538 yards, and 6 touchdowns. So it's too early to say Tampa Bay has a strong run defense yet, but I at least am paying attention to them. And if they can shut down Saquon Barkley in Week 3, we're really going to have something to talk about.
Yeah. Are you telling me not to use Saquon this week? Because I mean,
I'm a little down on him. I'm a little down.
Well, we'll have to see on that one because I think Saquon's going to carry some ownership. But there's a couple of really good running backs, including Christian McCaffrey. You just mentioned a full week and a half of rest, and he looks like he's going to be the focal point of that offense this week if Cam doesn't suit up. Another thing you wanted to point out is from Seattle, right? They've got this run game, but Chris Carson, he's got some fumbling issues here. What have you taken away from that? And how can we kind of project what's going to happen with the running back rotation? Because if Chris Carson's going to get 75 or 80% of the snaps, he's looking really juicy this week. If he's going to get 50% of the snaps and get pulled at any time, a little bit less juicy in this matchup against Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and that's what I'm worried about. He's played 2 years. Well, he's played 3 years in the league. 2 of them as a heavy ball carrier, and he's had a fumbling problem. Ezekiel Elliott had 6 fumbles last year. Ezekiel Elliott touches the ball more than anybody in the game. Carson's right behind him since the start of last year. He has 5 carries through 2 games, 5 fumbles through 2 games this year. He has a 23.5 fumble rate on PFF. That is as low as it reasonably can be without losing your job altogether. We saw Rashad Penny almost double his playing time last week, and if Carson can't hold on to the ball a little better, I'm afraid we're going to see a 50-50 split or even worse. It could turn into Penny's job before too long.
Yeah, there's all those, Pete Carroll, right? The one thing he hates to, he'll run it on 3rd and 10, knowing he's not going to get the first down simply because he doesn't want to turn over to the other team. He wants to punt the ball and he wants to run the ball. So if you get a back that has some fumbling issues, it does raise some red flags. And it's really interesting this week because, Seattle's a home favorite against the Saints. The Saints could have some short fields left for Seattle, right? Because it didn't look like Teddy Bridgewater had any clue what he was doing at quarterback last week. But I don't know. If he fumbles, he's going to get pulled really quickly, and I think it might transition into more of a timeshare. I was looking at a couple of projection sources today, and there are some very wild swings in Chris Carson's projections around the industry because I think some are thinking maybe he gets a little bit lesser of a workload, and some thinks he's back to that week 1 75% workload. I don't think anybody really knows. I'm kind of hoping we get some sort of leak throughout the week, but I'm not really sure we get that. The price on Carson's really nice around, especially on DraftKings this week. Should carry some high ownership, but just something to pay attention to into the back of your mind, that fumbling issue. The thing I want to look back on, Daniel, is the Bengals. And I'm not looking at John Ross, and I'm not looking at Tyler Boyd or Andy Dalton chucking for 400 yards. I'm looking at this horrific Bengals defense. I've pulled up, this is from the premium stats over here on Pro Football Focus, if my computer would cooperate with me. So in the premium stats, you get the whole team grade things. And I've circled by overall defense, the Bengals, the 31st team in total defense. Now, that would be good if there's 150 teams, but there's only 32. So when you're 31st out of 32, you're not really good on defense. That's overall. I look at their tackling grade. I don't even know if this was possible, but they've completely forgotten how to tackle. by far the lowest tackling grade I think I've ever seen since I've been using PFF, even through a couple of games of 32.6. Their coverage, 30th out of 32 teams, trailing only the Giants and Miami Dolphins. This is a horrific defense. We've got the Bills here. We're going to transition to talking about the Bills and something else here in a second. But if you're playing Cincinnati, your offense is rising. And I think any team until further notice that goes up against the Bengals is a team you really want to incorporate into your tournament teams for DFS.
Absolutely. We have all the numbers on the grade sheet there. I barely look at the numbers, and I just like to look at the colors because you see all those dark red dots next to the Bengals. Those numbers shouldn't even be allowed to go that low. It's early yet, and the Lions have a 29 special teams grade, so grades do go super low. But for any large sample, I've never seen them go as low as 32.6, and the Bengals are just sitting so far down.
Yeah, so their defense, the Bills play them this week, so pay attention to the Bills. I think we can roll out some Josh Allen. Pay attention to the running back spot. John Brown's looking good. I'm not expecting Cole Beasley to break these 50-yard wide open passes. That is the anti-Cole Beasley play, but I think the Bills are certainly going to be in play today. Let's jump into a little bit of Thursday showdown because people will listen to this on Thursday. If you don't, fast forward about a minute because, Daniel, this Thursday game stinks to me, right? You've got a couple notes on Derrick Henry, career crushing the Jaguars. Other than that, there's a lot of weather. There's some rain. There's some wind. This game could be a little dicey. You're really going to have to pay attention to weather. You might be able to roster both defenses and a kicker. And I think that's going to be more of a standard build where if you're trying to be contrarian in Thursday's GPPs, maybe it does shoot out if you pick a full lineup of offense. I don't even think a lot of people will be doing that this week. So what are your overall takes on this game on Thursday?
Yeah, there's not a lot exciting here. I don't know if it means anything that Derrick Henry has feasted on the Jaguars. It's probably just one of those flukes. But it is interesting that he's now played 49 games in his career, and 3 of his top 6 career games have come against the Jags. He averages more than twice as many PPR points against the Jags than he does not against them. His yards per carry is more than a yard ahead. And yes, that part of that is that huge game he had in week 14 last year. But even without that, he's better against them than anyone else. So if you're going for an offensive player, he's going to be a popular one, but he's at least very fascinating. But otherwise, I agree with you. It's either going to be load up on defenses and try to win a 50-50 or load up on the big names and hope it's a weird outcome that nobody can expect.
All right. Yeah, I'm just I'm not really into that game too much. Won't be playing. I like to play if you're on like fantasy draft or you're playing the DraftKings or even on FanDuel, the Thursday through Monday slate. I'm loving playing that this week because I hope all the casuals, man, I got to watch that Thursday night game. They play some players from this game. I'm fading that, and hopefully I can get an edge that way. So that's how I'm not playing the showdown as much, playing more the Thursday through Monday. I always like sports betting. It's becoming a lot more prevalent. I cashed my Cardinals plus 13.5. I'm giving myself a round of applause on that one. I've come back this week. I think on my lock on the sharp side contest we're doing with Vegas Insider, I've got a couple of them. One is the Falcons. I got them as 2-point road dogs. It looks like they're already down to 1.5-point road dogs. So I don't understand why the Falcons would be underdogs. I know they're on the road and they got bludgeoned in their first road game of the season, but the Colts aren't anything special. Brissett's been reasonable, but he's not really tossing for a lot of yards. I know they grind it down a little bit, but the Falcons offense is explosive, and Matt Ryan should not be a road underdog to Jacoby Brissett, in my opinion. So I pounced on that at the local sports book down the street. Greenline doesn't agree with me. I like to always look at Greenline to get a second opinion on Pro Football Focus. Do you have any kind of thoughts on this game?
First off, it makes me sad that you don't like that because I'm a Colts fan, but that's not really the point.
Sorry.
I get why it stresses you out. I just wonder, the Colts have in the last few years had sort of a Patriots-esque way of shutting down teams' top weapon. And so I wonder if that's going to hurt Julio Jones. Devonta Freeman hasn't gotten much going. So I can see a path to the Colts covering this, but I probably wouldn't bet the Colts. So I think if I had to bet, I'd probably go your way as well.
The other one I'm interested in is the Rams, -3 road dog. This Browns offensive line is trash. And you're telling me that Rams D-line isn't going to be able to get pressure? I think Baker Mayfield is going to be running all over Cleveland. I like the Rams to win this game pretty convincingly. The market is -3. Greenline has me on the good side here, and the Rams. I took this one as well. These are my two favorite games of the week.
Yeah, I don't see any way the Browns cover this as long as the Rams stay healthy.
Yeah, I really like this game. You got a couple too, and I'm on board with both. We were in complete agreement across the board. I think we got some really good games here. So tell me about yours.
That's so boring. We need to disagree more. We talked about how bad the Bengals are earlier, and I love the Bills to cover their -6 against them. I'm just hoping Devin Singletary's healthy for this game because he's had now 10 carries in his career, and 7 of them have gone for at least 12 yards. Like he's just busting out these long runs, and if the Bengals couldn't tackle me or you, they're not going to be able to bring him down for anything. So if Singletary's healthy and can have a full go in this game, he's going to be a monster.
Don't tell the bosses, but Green Line's wrong on this one. I'm on your side. I'm taking the -6. Green Line as at -5.5. I like the Bills in this one too. I think a touchdown's pretty easy by them. The other one you got's Detroit, and I'm in agreement with this too. I wanted to bet this at -7. It's come in a little bit. It's -6.5 now because they've kind of docked the Eagles a little bit because Deshaun Jackson and Alshon Jeffrey are looking a little questionable. I like the Lions side here. That defense looks really good for the Lions, and I think their offense is going to have no problem passing against the Eagles.
Yeah, the Eagles are just a walking wounded at this point. And so, I mean, if you told me these two teams are at full strength, I'd take the Eagles going away probably. Mm-hmm. But we're going to be without Alshon Jeffrey, without Deshaun Jackson, probably without Dallas Goedert. We're going to be the line is banged up on both sides of the ball. I just think Carson Wentz is going to be running for his life, and I'm terrified of what the Eagles may try to shut down the Lions' pass defense because Eagles cornerbacks are nothing.
Green Line, I like to get a second opinion. I think it's an educated. There's a couple things I look at, when I go to kind of make a bet, and as long as it's not too far off, I don't mind it. But I like the Lions side here as well, so I'm on board. I think we got 4 good games here, Daniel. I'm gonna have to make a trip and eat the extra half point in the Lions and get some money down on that as well. All right, let's go to some DFS as well. We're going to go position by position and talk about some of our favorite plays. The one thing I don't want to do too much on this podcast, because there's so much information is going to be on this Kansas City Baltimore game, right? We know what's going to happen in that game. So, of course, you can play Patrick Mahomes, and, of course, you can play Lamar Jackson. I want to spend a little bit more time talking about a couple other players that might be a little under the radar today. So, real quick, give me your thoughts on that game. I see it as a shootout. I believe I saw somewhere that these home, how specific do you want to get? Home day games in Kansas City are almost always go under in recent history. So you got to take that with a grain of salt. There's only a couple with Patrick Mahomes in there. But what are your expectations from this game?
I mean, anyone who's not expecting a shootout is just being contrarian for contrarian's sake. Yes, there's a chance this game comes out and it's 13-7, but there's no reason to predict that. This game should be 40 points either way, and just sit back and enjoy the fireworks. The only problem for DFS is that everyone's going to be on it, but you're going to get points out of it.
Yeah, let me pull up the ownership here behind the scenes. I actually don't think this game is going to draw as much ownership as I think it should. I was actually toying around before the show today, jamming in 150 just Kansas City, Baltimore game stacks and rotating basically every possible combination around it. Currently right now, we have Lamar Jackson as the highest owned on DraftKings at 13%, but Mahomes is just 7%. So this game eating up about 20% of the ownership. I don't think that's too egregious for what should be offensive fireworks. So I think maybe you could have a little bit of edge if you really like this game. Maybe juicing up a couple extra, percentage points in ownership. Again, it's early with our projected ownership, so you got to check back later in the week on it, watch a couple of the other shows or podcasts. That's what we have currently in the first run. You've got a couple other guys as well you wanted to talk about, so let's talk about the other two obvious names. We've got Dak and Tom Brady, both huge home favorites. Are you worried? Brady's the guy I'm really worried that he just spreads it around too much. It's a little bit harder to stack with him. Where Dak this week, he's down Michael Gallup too. This is a concentrated offense, and a concentrated offense in a huge total that's all on one side looks pretty juicy as a place to exploit this week.
The only thing I worry about with Dak is if they just decide to make it a running game. But you never know if they're going to be one of these teams going to get up to such a lead, they're going to pull these guys. But there's no reason not to expect the Cowboys and Patriots to put up 35, 40 points, score at will in this game. And sure, you might have to guess at which one to stack with Brady or not stack with him at all, or stack him with 3 different guys, whatever. But they both have massive ceilings this week.
Yeah, I think they're both pretty good plays. I think I would prefer the Mahomes or Lamar Jackson because those are the games you really want when other offense can actually provide some resistance and
Absolutely.
you get the offensive fireworks. But I could see some serious ways to make a Dak Prescott, Zeke, Amari Cooper lineup. And you just know that's where the production should theoretically be funneled to, as long as you don't get another rogue Jason Witten touchdown. You should get a lot of offense that way. I'm going to go a little off the board. I want to have a conversation with you about Mr. 4K, and that's Kyle 4K Allen I'm talking about here. It looks like Cam Newton, his ankle is hurting him this week, and normally we get these $5,200 or $5,300 quarterbacks on DraftKings, and they're trash. And you can somewhat contemplate playing trash, low $5,000 quarterbacks. We have a minimum price $4,000 quarterback on DraftKings this week. And Kyle Allen, he showed out last year, week 17. Now he's playing against the Saints scrubs backups in week 17. But, I mean, Daniel, the Arizona defense can't be much better than a bunch of scrubs from the Saints backups, right? And when you play Arizona, you get so many more plays. Arizona is going to be passing the ball, and I think Arizona is going to be able to put up points. I'm debating playing Kyle Allen in cash games, and I think you can even, stack him with a couple of his targets too, and have a reasonable expectation of it this week.
Yeah, I'm going to have a few lineups with him regardless, just for the cheapness. I think he could help Curtis Samuel. I think Greg Olsen has been a monster so far this year, and the Cardinals have allowed 75 more yards to tight ends than any other team through 2 weeks. I think there's a lot of stacking options here. I think he has a huge ceiling for the price. So I'm not going to escape this week without a few lineups just for fun there.
He had a 73.8 grade in week 17 last year. And so far this year on those team grades from the premium stats on Pro Football Focus, Arizona ranks 22nd in pass coverage and 17th in pass rush grade as a defense. Nothing to be too worried about. So keep an eye on this Cam Newton injury. To me, it seems like Cam Newton's going to be out. And to get these 4K quarterbacks who have the ability, right? He ran in for a touchdown. He has some running ability too. As a 4K quarterback, these are game changers for DFS. And let me tell you, those lineups look really good on DraftKings with him compared to trying to fit in Patrick Mahomes. I got a low-owned quarterback for you, Daniel, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Last week it was the running game from San Francisco that took it over, but I'm looking at Jimmy Garoppolo this week. He's at home. The Steelers, 27th in team pass coverage grade, 30th in pass DVOA, and their run defense has been lights out to start the season. And I got to think Kyle Shanahan, he's smart enough to not bash his head into a brick wall and try to run the ball against Pittsburgh over and over again. So you got some pretty clear stacking options with Jimmy G. You got Kittle. You got Debo looking like he might start a breakout. You can run it back with some people from Pittsburgh as well. I think Pittsburgh's going to handle themselves pretty well with Mason Rudolph. Jimmy G, he's a little higher priced than most, but what that's doing, he's got 2% ownership this week, and I like him to run some stacks with him today. So you got any thoughts on Jimmy G?
I will say you're going to spoil one of my wide receivers we'll talk about later, but I like Jimmy G stacking with Richie James Jr. this week. He's run more routes out of the slot for San Francisco than any other player by almost double. And Pittsburgh has been garbage against the slot. We'll see if Minka Fitzpatrick can fix that right away. I think it may take him a while, but they have allowed the most receptions to the slot, the most touchdowns to the slot, the most yards to the slot, the second highest passer rating to the slot. And if Richie James Jr. stays out of the slot, or George Kittle obviously there too, I think one of those two could have a monster game paired with Jimmy G.
Yeah, and you want to talk about Mason Rudolph as a value play too here. So like if Rudolph isn't he can't be as bad as Ben. Ben was playing with a bad arm, right? So like the Pittsburgh offense, it's not as bad as it was through the 6 quarters that Ben played. Ben was playing hurt. He's gone now. Rudolph came in and showed out. They've been grooming him to take over for Ben. There's a lot of good targets on this Pittsburgh offense, and I want to hear your spiel on Mason Rudolph. If Kyle Allen wasn't a thing at 4K, I think Mason Rudolph would be a fine value play this week.
Yeah, he was, for coming in as an emergency situation and just coming in to replace a guy, he still put up a 65.1 passing grade last week. That's not any amazing game, but it's fine. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. His one interception was entirely Dante Moncrief's fault, and if they ever throw the ball to Dante Moncrief again, I will drive to Pittsburgh and yell at them myself. So this is an offense geared to pass. He's got his old college teammate, James Washington, for whatever that's worth, and the answer to that could be nothing, but it could be something. He's got Juju Smith-Schuster. He's got Vance McDonald. I think Mason Rudolph at his price is going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I like him. One of my value plays, if you're over on Fantasy Draft, Kyler Murray is $400 above the minimum price of a quarterback over there. He's cheap enough on DraftKings as well. You just think about what's going on. So many snaps, pace. Carolina was one of the fastest teams in the league too. They'll probably slow it down if Cam Newton doesn't play a little bit, but I mean, they're going to come out, they're going to air it out. He's got the 300-yard bonus in 2 consecutive games to start his career. He should have had some touchdowns if Cliff Kingsbury actually called some fourth down plays instead of kicking a couple of field goals. I think he really regrets doing that in last week's game. They could have won that game. I think if he was a little bit more aggressive, but Kyler Murray's looking pretty good. They're throwing the ball all over the place. Carolina's defense, they're okay grades. They're not, top 5 or anything like that, but it's a decent passing defense. But I just don't care. Kyler Murray, 300 yards. He's going to get some short fields probably from Kyle Allen's offense stalling out every now and then. I think Murray is just simply too cheap, and I really, really love his price on Fantasy Draft. I think he is a cash viable quarterback over there.
I like him. I would like to see him start running more, because that's part of the reason we liked him so much coming into the year. But I do think there's a huge ceiling in this game.
Yeah, I don't know if that running's going to come. It seems he avoids contact at all costs. I would, if I was running around, he's the same size as me. If I'm out there, 300-pound men are trying to kill me.
Terrifying.
I wouldn't be running either. So I want to see him run when he's on my fantasy team for a couple of weeks, but I think as long term, he knows he can't sustain too many body blows from those 300-pounders. So I like what they're doing. I've already checked off the 300-yard bonus. I'm just getting that. So that's what I'm counting as my rushing yards this week. A couple other value plays at quarterback. I guess we'll talk about this game real quick. So you like Matthew Stafford, but you don't like Carson Wentz. I like Carson Wentz. So let's hash out this game a little bit. Give me the good on Stafford, and then we'll duke it out on Wentz.
The Eagles have given playing time to 4 cornerbacks so far. Sidney Jones has been good. The other 3 have been garbage. They've combined to allow, I believe it was 130 passer rating and coverage, 5 touchdowns against 1 interception. You can throw on the Eagles all day long. And now that the Lions not only have Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones still around, they've added Danny Amendola and TJ Hawkinson. The Eagles are not equipped to stop all these offensive weapons. I don't know if the Lions are going to keep their pass-happy ways, but Stafford has been a good fantasy quarterback through 2 weeks, and I don't see why that wouldn't continue in this game.
Yeah, I know the Lions like to grind it out a little bit, but I think the Eagles are going to be put up points because I like Carson Wentz. You're a little bit down on Wentz, so I think Wentz. So he doesn't have Deshaun Jackson and he doesn't have Alshon Jeffrey. So you plug in Whiteside and you plug in Nelson Aguilar. I still don't even think it's one of the worst passing duos in the league. You got Ertz is going to get 20 targets this week. This is a pretty good offense for the Eagles. I think they're still going to be able to put up points against the Lions.
I think I'm being a little not necessarily contrarian. Wentz just scares me. I don't think he's necessarily going to be bad, but I could see a situation where that Lions line just wrecks him early on with the way the Eagles' offensive line has been struggling. And yes, I like J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. I like Nelson Aguilar if he doesn't do the alligator arms like he did last week. But there's a reason they weren't the starters in this team, so I just think his ceiling is lower than it has been.
Do you know who the highest projected owned player on the entire slate is right now?
I'm going to say Zach Ertz since we're there, but
Nelson Aguilar.
He's
3.6K on DraftKings. He's basically
Goodness.
free. So if the Philadelphia injury holds, I like Aguilar too. I'll talk about a couple of swerves off him in a little bit. And I got one more quarterback I want to talk about, and that's Matt Ryan. I know Indy plays slow, and I know they take away the number 1 target, right? They don't give up a lot of 100-yard games to number 1 receivers, but he's Julio Jones. I don't care what you do against Julio Jones. He's going to get open. He's catching touchdowns now. Calvin Ridley, the touchdown regression monster, was supposed to be coming for him. That's not happening. You've got Austin Hooper, I think is one of the sleeper plays at tight end this week. They kind of funnel to tight ends because, of course, they do try to take that team's number 1 wide receiver away. And, Freeman looks like he's dust, just no yards after contact, no anything coming from him. So I like Ryan. He's indoors with Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley and Austin Hooper, and Sanu's still going to have a couple of big games. If they can put up some big scores, that slow offense to the Colts is going to have to speed it up. So I think there's ways Ryan really gets there in tournaments this week.
I'm not going to argue with you on his ceiling. I'm probably not going to be using him this week, partly because of that pace. I just don't think there's going to be enough opportunity.
All right. If you had to pick, you got one more. I mean, everybody knows not to take quarterbacks against Denver, but what do you see? No Aaron Rodgers, right?
It's just there's been nothing to him so far. 2 games he hasn't topped 210 passing yards. He's done no rushing, and yes, it's against Denver. So I still love Aaron Rodgers. I think for the season he's still going to be a top 10 quarterback, but he's not Aaron Rodgers anymore right now.
What a horrible coach hiring as well. Just like the anti-Aaron Rodgers coach over there.
It's so frustrating. Imagine him with Kingsbury. Not that was ever a possibility, but just something like that. Imagine him with a real offensive innovator.
Yeah, it just wasted the end of Aaron Rodgers' career. And I know Scott always says Aaron Rodgers, he thinks Aaron Rodgers has been done for a couple years based on his tweets, but it really doesn't look too good for him to start the season here. Let's move on to running back. And it's tough this week, and unless you go with the Kyle Allen at quarterback, then your lineups look really good. But the pricing on the running backs is pretty tight on DraftKings this week. You've got Barkley, CMC, and Zeke are all up there. Out of those 3, I'm going to throw this to you first. Which one of those do you think is most likely to have the highest score at the end of the week?
I don't see how you can say anything but Zeke going against Miami. He could have 100 yards in the first quarter of this game. He could have. Tell me any given quarter he could have 100 yards in that game. I think Ezekiel Elliott has a monster ceiling. I've already talked about how I'm a little down on Saquon Barkley this week, so I think there's a pretty clear cast system in those 3.
What about CMC? So his workload, I think there's a couple of different ways to look about this. You've got the last week when Cam really wasn't doing anything on the short week. He really disappointed for a lot of DFS players. From what I can tell in our projected ownership, he's tied with Nelson Aguilar as the highest owned player on the week here. So I think the early projections are that they lean on him even more. 30 touches. He's going to play every snap. That's what Christian McCaffrey does. It's against Arizona, who is going to push the pace of play. So there's more plays for Carolina in theory than I think they've had in any other game. I think Allen's a reasonable enough backup quarterback to not let the offense fall flat on his face. McCaffrey I think he's a couple bucks cheaper too. Let's see here. So he's 200 cheaper. He's 8,700 and Zeke is 8,900. What's your overall prognosis for CMC? I think that was more of a blip on the radar last week.
Yeah.
And not anything we should expect moving forward.
I think he's great. I would have no problem pivoting from Zeke to McCaffrey, but I'm picking one. I'm still going with Elliott. But yes, McCaffrey with that pace, that playing time, and that quarterback, I think his ceiling is almost there. Yeah. It's almost what Zeke says.
Hey, you play Kyle Allen. You don't got to choose. You can play both of them. No problem. You play Zeke and CMC pretty easily there.
That would be a fun lineup.
A couple of value plays. What are you looking at? Well, actually, wait, before we get to that, let's talk. This is one I'm really torn on because you get the Le'Veon Bell you noted here on our sheet here, monster workload. And I agree. He's going to touch the ball probably 20 to 30 times, I think, without question in this game. But, I mean, if you're getting like 3 yards a touch, is it really worth it? He's probably going to get a lot of those dump offs too from Falk. They really seem to have that connection. This is a tough one for me to try to grasp for fantasy this week.
I'm with you. I wasn't totally sold on it, but I felt like I needed to mark it down so we could talk about it. But if you're telling me any running back, you give me LeGarrette Blount and getting 30 touches in the game, I would be interested in him. Right. Le'Veon Bell, all he needs is 1 or 2 plays on that. He's already going to get 15 points just on receptions. It's going to one long run. He's guaranteed to get the 100-yard bonus. I'm fascinated by it. Even in an awful game, it's going to have an awful game script. I think he's a very fascinating play this week.
Yeah, he's interesting. I would imagine. Let me look at the ownership. He's probably coming in a lot lower. He's 7K on DraftKings. Austin Eckler is doubling him up in ownership. I think David Johnson. Let me see if I can find him. Can't find David Johnson on the screen here, but yeah, Eckler's the guy who's basically he's $200 more than Le'Veon Bell, and it's really tough to. I mean, Austin Eck. If Melvin Gordon showed up, I don't even think he gets the starting job back. I think this is Eckler's offense right now, and the Chargers they're running pretty good. I know he fumbled and it kind of cost him the game last week, but he's going up here against the Texans, the second worst run grade defense on PFF this year overall. He's game script proof no matter what. He's got 13 targets and 29 rush attempts. He's got 50 yards and 50 yards rushing and receiving, I believe, in both games. He was too cheap last week. I mentioned he was basically the most egregiously priced star running back. He had another good game. I think his price is catching up, but I still think he's a little bit of a value. Really hard for me to see him just not come through yet again.
Yeah, it's not been the split between him and Justin Jackson that we thought. Jackson's getting work, but it's definitely Eckler's team. He's been better than Melvin Gordon when they were both in the field. Efficiency-wise, everything was pointing Eckler's way. I loved him coming into last year. I did not see this workload coming this year, but if it continues, he's going to be a superstar as long as he stays cheap.
All right, let's talk about the Bills' run game here. I'm looking up Devin Singletary. We're recording this Wednesday night. I'm trying to see if he practiced today. Do you have any idea on that?
I haven't seen. Spent the evening at my daughter's birthday party, so I missed any late-breaking updates.
Yeah, I'm not seeing. So he did miss practice today, it looks like. So this is something we're going to have to keep an eye on because as far as I can recall last week, the 49ers are still running the ball against the Bengals. And I don't care if it's Devin Singletary, if it's Josh Allen, if it's TJ Yeldon or Frank Gore, the Bills offense, I think is going to be able to do whatever they want. I think this could be one of the best fantasy outputs for the Bills all season. And if Singletary's in, I think we can use him. And I honestly think if he's out, Frank Gore is going to be the dude. Yeah. And that looks pretty juicy. His price, they upped it a little bit, but I still don't think enough.
Yeah, if Singletary's in, I'm using Singletary. If he's out, I'm using Frank Gore. And, I mean, that's just a lock-and-load spot. I'm not even going to think twice about it. I could see stacking them with the Buffalo defense and having just a big old time there.
Yeah, I like that quite a bit. I want to talk about Dalvin Cook, PFF's third highest-graded running back this season. I've got him with 46 opportunities. That's rushes plus targets through 2 weeks, 70% of the snaps. I know Oakland, they've been decent against the run and an absolutely horrific pass defense, but this is like one of those things, Minnesota wants to run the ball, and how do you not want to give the ball to Dalvin Cook, who's making these explosive plays every week? The only other player in the league doing things like this right now that's really capable has been Saquon. So, I mean, Cook has a way to be overall fantasy one this year. He's at home, big favorite. Those are strong trends for running backs. I think Cook's price it's finally caught up a little bit, but I still think he's well worth the price tag this week. If you're not playing Kyle Allen and you can afford both Zeke and CMC, I think you can substitute one of those to Cook, and you might not even see a drop-off.
Yeah. One of my biggest regrets of this season so far is that I wrote a piece back early August, late July, where I did just 1 versus 1, Joe Mixon versus Dalvin Cook. Mm-hmm. And I came into it thinking I was going to pick Joe Mixon. And when I got to the end, I felt like my argument pointed to Dalvin Cook. But in my head, I was like, no, I still have to pick Joe Mixon. I picked Joe Mixon, and I published it. And the next day, I was like, that was stupid. I should have picked Dalvin Cook.
You got you got the buttons on the back end. Delete it before anyone finds it.
It felt so dishonest. It's like it's always going to be there in black and white that I said Joe Mixon over Dalvin Cook this year, and it was so stupid, and I feel like a moron.
Oh yeah, that does. I mean, Mixon's just absolutely horrific, and Cook is knocking the lights out every single one. So Cook is it's a nice consolation prize if you can get CMC or Zeke into your lineups this week, in my opinion. Couple of duds. If you want to hit on Saquon one more time, this one's always a little risky going up against Saquon. He can hit those long home runs. I think he can do it against anybody. So just if you can, try to go in just a little bit more depth and repeat what you found out about the Tampa Bay defense.
Tampa Bay has been lights out against the running backs so far. It's only been 2 weeks. It might not continue. I still think Saquon's a top 5 or 8 running back this week. I'm not all the way out on him, but considering the ceilings we have with the guys we've talked about with Elliott and with McCaffrey and with Bell and with Eckler and with Cook, I don't see a point in splashing on Barkley when he's going up against a tough matchup.
Yeah, let's transition to running backs or into wide receivers. And we'll use this to be one of the main articles you should read with your PFF subscription every week. It's Scott Barrett's expected fantasy points, the top fantasy usage through week 2. And there's one guy leading the way here. It's Keenan Allen. He's 7,000 on DraftKings. Is like, oh, Keenan Allen, he's this short A-dot receiver, and we don't want to push his price up too high. And I can tell you what, Keenan Allen's going to vie for one of the highest owned receivers of the week at $7,000. You can't pass up. What does he have? 25 targets in the past 2 weeks. He's getting throws deeper down the field. And it's Allen, it's Eckler. Mike Williams will probably be a little bit healthier, but this is it. This is a very concentrated offense, and with a really good quarterback, these are almost like surefire fantasy points, in my opinion.
Yeah, Scott's piece it's expected fantasy points. So he takes every target, every carry, everything you get, figures out over the last 10 years what that's been worth on average. So, this target's been worth 2.3 points because of the depth of target and the spot on the field and all that. Allen, through 2 games, is almost 5 points more valuable in his touches or opportunities than any other player. He should have been scoring 26.2 points per game. That kind of usage you don't see. It's not going anywhere. He's still going to be a massive contributor, and he's going up against Bradley Roby this week, who's been our 13th worst graded quarterback over the last 2 years. And there's everything is shaping up for a massive Allen week 3.
Yeah, I'm playing Keenan Allen. Whatever I have to do, I'm playing Keenan Allen in my cash games this week. We already, of course, Christian McCaffrey. The other guy is this is a receiver. Larry Fitzgerald hasn't been chalk in a long time in DFS, and he's going to be this week. He's 5,100 on DraftKings. He's the 3rd highest expected fantasy points per game. And it just goes back to the air raid system of this Arizona offense getting a lot of plays. And this is old Larry Fitzgerald getting the ball down the field now.
Yeah, it's very base stat, but there are 3 players with 100 yards in both games, 100 receiving yards. John Ross, Mark Andrews, and Larry Fitzgerald. He's back to where he was. We already talked about the pace in that game. I think there's a monster potential for Fitzgerald in week 3.
Yeah, so if you guys have access to PFF, this is probably one of your must-read articles of the week. I like Daniel's too. The What Have We Learned? I always like to review a little bit too. But read through this. You'll kind of see who's running hot, who's running cold, and you get some of his favorite fantasy points per dollar towards the bottom of it. He gives you some buy lows, some sell highs, all based off expected fan. If he wants me to sell Dalvin Cook high, sorry, Scott, that's not happening. I'm a believer. Sell Austin Eckler, no chance. That's not happening either. But a lot of good stuff in here from Scott, and one of the most premium articles I think you can get from PFF or basically anywhere that's easily translatable into DFS.
Yeah, Scott loves to say that piece is the single biggest thing that helps him in DFS every week writing it. Yeah. And I tell you, I edit it and read it every week, and it's the same thing. It is massively helpful.
Yeah. So let's move to wide receivers. We just talked about Keenan Allen. A little bit controversial here. You got Mike Evans, who is he the true number 1? Let's have a talk here. Is it him or Godwin this week?
I think this is an Evans week. You could talk me out of it if he has a bad week this week going forward, but I still think he's the number 1 in this offense. His massive ADOT, 18 yards down the field, and the Giants have the worst PFF grade against the deep ball, and it's not close. I think they're 2 points worse than anybody else. It's like a 20.6 coverage grade against the deep ball. So if there's going to be a Mike Evans week, it's got to be this one.
A couple Keenan Allen, we just talked about that. I know we talked about the Colts defense limiting Julio, but Julio's just 7,300 imaginary DraftKings dollars this week. It seems a little bit too low when your name's Julio Jones. I think your salary should always start with an 8,000 imaginary dollars, and when you're 7,300 imaginary dollars, I think Julio's still a little bit too cheap. Another guy I like is Sammy Watkins, 13 targets last week. I mean, it's going to be really hard, I think, to predict which Kansas City receiver has the massive week, other than probably at least 2, if not all 3 of them, including Travis Kelce, all go nuts on basically a regular occurrence every single week. I think, is Patrick Mahomes, to me, he's already basically like one of the 10 best quarterbacks, I think, to ever play the game. And I think you can argue he's he's just clearly superior at the position compared to anyone we've ever seen. So, and when you have a quarterback like that, they're tossing the ball all over the place this year. The running backs are hurt. I like Watkins to bounce back big time this week.
Yeah, right now Mahomes is a cheat code. It's, he's going to be expensive and he has to be expensive. But if you just started every single week with Mahomes and 1 or 2 of his pass catchers stacking the lineup, it might not work. There are going to be weeks where you're not going to win. You're never wrong for making that lineup. It's always a good, smart play, even if it doesn't work out.
He's throwing for 400-plus yards and 4 touchdowns, and it feels like a letdown based on what the game is.
He had 4 touchdowns in one quarter, and then we got nothing in the second half. You were sitting there thinking, drooling over what could be when you'd already gotten 4 touchdowns from the guy.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. So I like Watkins, and of course you can play Hardman. I think Demarcus Robinson, which one of those two is going to have the big – I don't know. I don't think anybody can really predict that. Just know that if you're playing Mahomes in a tournament, He's expensive, and when your quarterbacks are expensive, you usually got to stack a couple of options with them for it to all be worth it. So if you're playing Mahomes, pick at least 2 targets, if not 3. Run it back with 1 or 2 guys from the opposite side. Hopefully the game goes bonkers and you ship $1 million. You got a couple strange names here on value play. So you've got Devin Smith, Benny Fowler, and Richie James. So let's give me a spiel on all these guys. We already said Nelson Aguilar is going to be really chalky. I think you can go to Whiteside as a little bit of a swerve off that in tournaments. You're getting really far away from that. Guys who are going to be – actually, I think Smith will garner a little ownership this week. But these other guys, these are like 0.5% owned guys, I think, in DFS.
Yeah. I already mentioned James in the slot against the Steelers. We could see Minkah Fitzpatrick have an impact right away, but otherwise, I don't see any reason not to like any slot receiver playing against them. Fowler, a lot of that's going to come down to what receivers can play for the Giants next week, but he had a huge workload in week 2, and if Shepard and all the other guys are out again, there's no reason to think that won't continue. Meanwhile, Devin Smith, the only knock against Devin Smith in his career has been he hasn't been able to stay healthy. He played, I think, 3 games in the last 3 years because he keeps tearing his ACL. But he's there now. He had a massive week 2. He was good in the preseason. I think he had the 3rd most receiving yards in the preseason. Gallup's out. If we see Xavier Howard on Amari Cooper, they're going to have to throw to somebody else. So I think Devin Smith's a very interesting cheap play this week.
Yeah, and I like those guys quite a bit. Another cheap guy I'm interested in. We talked about Fitz, and of course I like Christian Kirk too. But the other guy playing nearly every snap, he's 3K on DraftKings. It's Damiere Byrd, revenge, our favorite thing in DFS, Daniel. So we got Damiere Byrd, revenge, going here against Carolina. He's 3K. He's got 7 targets in each game. I really don't see it stopping. Large 90+% snap share. I know your power at the mere thought of Damiere Byrd. The lights have gone off at your house. All right, there we go.
That was weird.
but he's 3K, and it allows you to imagine Kyler Murray to Byrd to Fitz, and you run it back with like Curtis Samuel and Greg Olsen, and that all hits. You now have Zeke and CMC and Julio, like all those guys are now in that lineup going off with that. So you can make some really fun lineups with them.
I never saw Damiere Byrd coming this year. That is the most out of nowhere. You could have convinced me more that Devin Smith would be relevant again for Damiere Byrd. I don't know where this came from, but it's great. I agree with you.
Yeah, a 3K receiver that's playing 90% of the snaps in the air raid, not something to overlook. So keep that in mind if you're looking for swerves away from Nelson Aguilar. Anyone else you really want to talk about at wide receiver?
No, I mean, I think we need to stay away from the Vikings receivers, but we all know that until they show they can throw and be productive, you're not touching those guys. I think we've covered what the main points are.
All right, let's go to tight end. I'll let you lead off with George Kittle, who the DraftKings algorithm's really weird. They're like, you're TJ Hawkinson, and you go berserk in week 1, and we decrease your price $100. And then you're George Kittle, who has an amazing track record, and you're the superstar, but you've had a couple of bad games. And do you know what George Kittle's price is this week? Take a guess.
I mean, if I'm setting it, it's going to be in the high 7s, but I bet it's not if you're saying that.
It is $5,600 on DraftKings.
What is wrong? Really?
Yes.
I hadn't looked at his price. That's insane.
He's $5,600, and it's really interesting because I don't normally like 2 tight ends, but Kittle and Ertz is just $5,700 too, and I think Ertz is going to get 10 to double-digit targets pretty much in any scenario in this game against Detroit. These are some really good players whose prices are too low, and you can make some really good lineups with both of them, one of them. And, you know, if you're using Kittle and I talked about Garoppolo as a low-owned one, you can run it back with some Pittsburgh players and, you know, have a really cheap stack with high upside as well.
Yeah, everything I liked about this is a weird way to phrase this. Everything I liked about Richie James, I also like about George Kittle. But
Kittle's probably won't be saying that too much.
Yeah, not the way you expected to phrase that. But Kittle's relatively slow first 2 weeks. That honestly, it wouldn't be that way if he hadn't lost those 2 touchdowns to penalty. But regardless, it has been on the surface numbers. Is going to keep his ownership low this week. And how often are you going to get a relatively cheap and relatively lightly owned George Kittle in a cake matchup? This is going to be a big Kittle week. All in.
Yeah, I like it quite a bit. A couple of my favorite guys I mentioned, Ertz, I think at 5,700. Just the pure targets he should get from Wentz this week make him a almost can't miss player in my opinion. And I want to get your opinion on Mark Andrews. It seems like there's a $800 price increase cap on tight ends on DraftKings as well. I'm guessing this somewhere in their system because Mark Andrews was $3,000 week 1, and he went to $3,800. And then he gets another 28 fantasy points, and he's only $4,600. Not out there every snap, but he's not out there to block. He's out there to run routes and catch touchdowns and do a lot of damage. How do you not have how do you not have interest in Kittle at 56 and Mark Andrews at 46? I think Austin Hooper's a reasonable sleeper at 3,600. You're going to talk about Greg Olsen at 3,700. I mean, this is like a resurgence year of the tight end, I think.
Yeah, I actually, that was one of my bold calls this year was that I think tight end has a bounce back year.
Look at you.
But hey, I had to recover from the mix and cook thing.
Anything you can take after that.
Absolutely. I had to find something to brag about. But yeah, Andrews, I don't think this is going to be – he's not going to be a top 3, top 4 tight end all year. But I think top 7 is his floor. So maybe he has a bad game because he's not playing every snap. But as long as he's out there, I step back a little bit and just say I could see myself using a tight end in my flex this week in a lot of lineups because of the way these guys are priced.
Yeah, it's strange. I probably won't do it in cash games, but in tournaments, I usually, in the lineup builder here on RotoGrinders, I usually make sure I don't have tight ends in my flex. I set the setting at 0. I force none, but I don't think I'm going to force none because I think you can have 20 and 30 fantasy point performances from a variety of tight ends. And it's just, you gotta always kind of be thinking about DFS. What's the game we're playing this week? Because the game we're playing this week differs from last week, and we have a lot of historical trends, but you can throw some of those out the window when you get sort of really underpriced tight ends with the high ceilings. Maybe all these teams are figuring out, right? You throw it to the middle of the field. That's where the action is in today's NFL, and that's where the tight ends really seem to be thriving quite a bit. Give me a spiel on Greg Olsen. Give me a couple of duds, and we'll get out of here.
Olsen has 18 targets through 2 weeks. I did not expect that, and he's only the 14th tight end in pricing right now. He's way cheaper than he should be. I know we said all these other guys are too, and somebody has to be expensive, but Arizona has not been able to stop any tight end through 2 weeks. Unless they start doing that, Olsen is going to be a big player.
All right. And Demetrius Harris, you got a little note on it. I don't think you need to go that route today, but what's your take? He's just never really looked. He can catch touchdowns, but other than that, I don't really think he's that functional as a tight end.
It's just a deep dive if you somehow end up having to punt the position altogether. Joku's going to be out this week. Harris is a absolute behemoth. Yeah. So if you're looking for just a touchdown for cheap.
All right. I think that's going to about do it for the PFF show. Again, check out all the stuff Daniel writes, his look back every week, along with a lot of other stuff that he does there. Read all Scott's article. You get the fantasy tabs. There's a lot of DFS stuff. If you really want the premium stats or green line, you can pay up and get access to some of that stuff. There's only a couple of sites I use. There's this one. We just had Reeves from Sharp Football in the last show. That's the other one that I use along with all the stuff at RotoGrinders, and that's basically where all my DFS research comes from. So PFF, well worth your subscription. Daniel, it's been fun on week 3. We'll run it back week 4, buddy. And good luck to you and to everybody else out there in DFS. And thanks to all you for watching. And we out you.
Appreciate it.